Hi, Valisha. It is so nice
Hi,
to have you here.
Hi, Rose. How are you?
I'm good, good. I'm excited for this chat because I don't do many of these with people that are working in companies. It's more people from HR doing consulting or things like that. And I'm excited for this because, yeah, I feel like there's a lot to unpack in terms of the work that you're currently doing. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your experience in HR, how you got into HR, and what you're currently doing.
Great. Firstly, thank you for having me, Rose. I'm really excited, and now even more excited that you say, it's usually not necessarily big companies like ours. So I'm really excited about that. So really, thank you for having me, and I hope that the session is useful for your viewers. So my name is Valisha Naidoo. I'm currently an acting senior manager within the Human Resources Division at HR in Eskom, and my background is in chemical engineering actually. So it's been an interesting journey moving into human resources. I actually spent most of my career in management consulting, and I joined HR in 2020. So just at the peak of COVID when we went into lockdown. And the reason really was to deliver Eskom's Future World of Work program. So at the time, we went into lockdown and we needed to work remotely and bring in all these new technologies. And so the opportunity presented itself. And I thought, I have such a passion for people and technology. And it just sounded perfect to bring those two together. And so I joined the HR team then, and we introduced Eskom's first remote hybrid work model, which was really exciting for a company of our size. And then we started doing more digitization projects, things like crowdsourcing, which you may have heard of, and piloting just new models of working for the organization. So it's been a really interesting journey, but it's probably the best decision I ever made. Never go back to engineering again.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, you hear a lot of people that do other degrees and go into HR, but chemical engineering is the first one. That I mean, you're so wired so differently as an engineer, right? But it's how amazing that you discovered later on that people was like a passion of yours. So what an amazing kind of way to connect the dots. And what was that kind of first exposure to HR coming from chemical engineering? Like
Yeah,
how did
so my
you
first my first project was really helping the HR team with strategy work. And so I got a really interesting view of the entire value chain, understanding some of their challenges. And I think it just started creating this passion within me that I wanted to get more involved. And thankfully, I think I made an impression on the group executive at the time. So when the Future World of Work project came about, she had then said, are you interested? And I really thought about it because, again, coming from an engineering background, there's such a stigma around HR in organizations. And I really had to think about, is this the right move for me? And I thought, what's better than impacting people and having a direct impact on the day-to-day lives of not just our employees, but our customers as a big organization like Eskom. So I think that was really how it started. And so, yeah, it was a easy yes after that. And I think the first few months, obviously, it was a lot of learning, and I'm still learning. And it's such an interesting environment when you're dealing with people, I think, compared to technology and equipment. And it's so much more complex, and I find it so interesting. It never gets boring, in the HR space.
Yeah, I hear you. There's a delicate balance as well because it can be emotionally draining on the other side, right?
Exactly.
But as you said, you know when you have a calling, like when you get a real like just feel of satisfaction and fulfillment out of helping people out. So yeah, that's very much how it
Absolutely.
goes for people in HR. What's the size complement of Eskom at the moment?
So we have about 40,000 permanent employees. So those are directly employed by Eskom. And then we have probably up to 100,000 contractors, subcontractors who are always working on site. So it's quite a big workforce at any time. And like you mentioned earlier, we're spread across the country. We also have sites that many people don't know about. We had Eskom Uganda, where we were operating and maintaining power stations in Africa. And so it's quite a big organization that we have.
Yeah, that's massive. And yeah, doing HR for a big organization presents its own, like challenges in a good way, but like
Mhm.
it's a different way going about HR when you work for an SME, when you work for a big company. You have mentioned now a couple of times this program of Eskom of the future of digital. What was it?
Yeah. So we called it the future world of work. So it's really future of work trends that are happening that we try to bring or introduce into Eskom. So I mentioned hybrid and remote working, which was, really important during COVID. But we also looked at other things like digitization. We introduced something called crowdsourcing, which was something we introduced to address some of our skills gaps. So we went out into the public domain and said, if you have a skill that you think might add value to Eskom, please share your CV. So we almost created our own LinkedIn for
Mm,
Eskom with a database of skills of people who are available and willing to support Eskom to turn around the business. And that really helped us plug some of our critical skills gap in a sector where we have very scarce, power expertise. We're
mm,
also piloting something called job bidding, which is akin to the gig economy, where we're looking at how do we get our workforce to participate in projects and get exposure to different areas of the business without necessarily having to leave their role. So you're almost contracting within the organization.
mm. Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And you mentioned as well this concept of like turning the company around, like this idea of like hopping into a new way of doing work, which is really interesting. Did that stem from a need to like looking at Eskom being like I don't know how many years in business Eskom has been, but it's been long. Um, was that like a need to like let's relook at how we work, and how many years ago this happened where this kind of need for a turnaround was necessary?
Yeah, definitely. So, Eskom's 100 years old. We actually turned 100 years last year. And so that was a huge milestone for us. And I think it reminded us of the fact that we needed to modernize because, a lot of the time when you're in a sector and you're a monopoly for a very long time, you can become a little bit stagnant. So we had a few different phases of programs that looked at turnaround, not just for modernization, but also given that we were having financial and operational difficulties. So we started probably around 2017, 2018. We started with some projects called the Business Productivity Program. We called it the Design to Cost Program. So there have been different phases or phases of them. But really, what it meant was how do we become a more efficient organization, both from a cost point of view, from an operations point of view, but also the way we work. And so that's really where some of these things stemmed from. And we re-looked at our human resources strategy as a whole and revamped the entire strategy. And so in 2019, we developed what we call our people plan. And our people plan focuses on five key things. The one is creating a high performance culture. That's probably the most important for our organization and making sure that we're the most high performing utility that we can be. The second was building critical capabilities. So that's looking at, as an energy company with a changing sector in South Africa, how do we make sure we have the right skills for that? The third element was making sure our employees are as productive as possible, but that we're as cost efficient as possible as well. The fourth element was looking at how do we manage our employee benefits? So our costs were obviously ballooning at the time, given the size of our workforce. And so we looked at, how do we address some of the inefficiencies in managing our workforce? And the last one, which is probably one of the biggest passions within our team, is realizing the diversity dividend. So being a state-owned company in South Africa, it's so important that we transform our workforce. And so we looked at, how do we create a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-age workforce, and how do we make sure that every one of those people feel included and feel like they belong. And so
Mm.
it's quite a multifaceted program.
Hmm. And it's been a couple of years in the running.
Yeah, so the people plan was developed in 2019, and each year we revise it, but we've seen some huge strides since we've implemented that program. And so each year we just relook at, what are the new things we need to consider.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. And is Eskom like, is it agile in terms of like the hiring process? And again, when you look at hiring again with all these pillars in mind in terms of like maybe newer generations coming into a workforce, and is that something that because I can understand, as you mentioned, Eskom has gone for a couple of years of a lot going on, and I guess, as you mentioned, business wise there was decisions to be made. That did that meant downsizing the business, or what was that strategy around turning the business around from a staff complement point of view?
Yeah, so I think probably two key things is yes, we did definitely downsize, and we called it workforce optimization because it wasn't just about reducing numbers.
Mm,
It was looking at where are the inefficiencies in our
mm,
workforce, especially in skills categories that were not core or critical to our business, and saying, given that technology is also advancing, how do we make sure our workforce is aligning to those technology changes? And so we had between 2018 and 2020, probably we had reduced our workforce significantly, but obviously, again, focusing on the key areas of inefficiency. And what's interesting now is we're now in a growth phase. So because Eskom has revised its strategy and we're now looking at a just energy transition, there are new skills that we need that we don't have currently. We're also restructuring the business. We're legally separating our operational divisions into three different entities. And so that means each business will require skills that they didn't have before. And so all of that requires, skills that we don't have currently. And so
mm,
since 2023, we've actually seen a slight growth, and we expect to see growth in the next 10 to 15 years as well. So as we adapt to these, new technologies. So for example,
mm,
most of our workforce is coal power station employees, and we need to retrain them or reskill them to make sure that they're able to adapt to renewables and clean energy technologies. And so a huge part of that growth is partly influenced by that.
yeah, and that I can also understand why with your background, that's also required when it comes to relooking at these plans and staffing, and because you also need the technical background to understand how to create efficiencies, right? Like, you need to understand what the roles are about and how people, what skills gaps you have and things like that. So it makes more sense now that that you put it that way. I also would love to know, from a cultural point of view, Eskom has been, in the hot seat for a couple of years. Does that affect the staff complement? Does HR address, the team members in terms of, staying aligned to what the company, the mission of the company, and trying to really keep a strong sense of belonging, and making sure that everybody's striving for a better future? And I love to understand what that work entails, because I really don't think I have ever had the experience of speaking with a company where that's in the public eye and that it is being scrutinized for quite a few years now.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sentiment of the general public definitely has an impact on our workforce. At the end of the day, I'm also an Eskom customer. My family, my friends are Eskom customers. And so you're talking about yourself as well when you talk about the general public. And so I think from a human resources perspective, it's really important for us to manage our reputation, not just because these are our customers, but also it impacts the way we attract and retain talent within this competitive market. And so we try to proactively manage that perception both internally and externally. And so some of the things we do Externally, of course, is our social media, making sure we are transparent and we're communicating some of the positive stories that are happening. For example, today we reached 50 days of no load shedding, which, it has been a long time since we've achieved something like that. And there are still a lot of naysayers in the public domain who think, this is related to elections, or, that after elections we'll load shed again. And while we're not out of the woods for sure, it's a huge achievement for a company of, the size, a company that's cash strapped. We're dealing with very old infrastructure. We're navigating regulations. We're navigating corruption, as we know in the past. And so we have to kind of focus on how do we communicate transparently to our customers and try and address those sentiments. And we do monitor our customer sentiment as well. And we keep an eye on those trends and try to get feedback from our customers. Internally, though, I think it's a little bit broader than communication, although communication is definitely one of those things. I think probably we've done three things that have worked well, and we are continuing to focus on. One is leadership. Leadership is so important in our space. We've had significant instability over the last 10 years, probably with probably 13, 14 CEOs. We just got a new CEO in March. And so having the right caliber of leaders in the right spaces at the right time is so important. So we've spent as HR a lot of time trying to stabilize our leadership team and make sure that we have the right people in the right spaces. And I can personally say that the performance improvement that we've seen in our generation division is directly linked to having the right leader in that division. He's quite knowledgeable. He has a rapport within his team. He's built so much of trust within the team. And I think that motivates them to keep working hard. The other thing we had to address was issues around morale and motivation, because we had a few years where we were cost cutting, and we had to take away a lot of the incentives that we had on the table. It had unintended consequences on morale and motivation. And so recently, over the last 2 years, we've started reintroducing some of those things. So we have a lot of incentives, both monetary and non-monetary. We try to celebrate the wins, having our annual awards ceremonies. We have healthy competition. So we have, for example, something called the Blue Flag Games. So these are sporting events that we have within the company. And I found that having people engage on the pitch versus in the office creates a different type of camaraderie amongst people. You almost network better, you communicate better, and you take those skills back into your workspace, and you don't realize the impact of how sport can influence the way you work in an office environment. And one of the things that one of our values, for example, is called Sinobuntu, which means caring for one another. And so we really strive to take care of the next person. Safety is really important for us. And so we try to address some of the issues through those things. And then I think that helps us drown out the noise of the negative sentiment that we get from outside. And then I think the last element probably is wellness, making sure our people are healthy, making sure that they're safe. We have a really strong employee assistance program, and this is open to all employees and their immediate families. And they're able to work with either work challenges or personal issues that they may have, so that they can bring their best selves forward. And so we really encourage people to utilize some of these services.
That's interesting. What is that part of the employee assistance program in terms of like the type of assistance that you give? Like when people have to work through, as you said, like personal challenges, work challenges, what's the type of offering that you have?
Sure. So, like I said, anyone's able to call you. You can either call them, they can call you back, or whatever the case may be. There are different channels, but it can be any problem. So, if you're dealing with mental health issues, if you have a stressful day, if you're dealing with financial challenges and you're not able to manage your finances, if you're a manager and you feel like you have some team challenges, you can call them. So, it really it's open to anything that you might be dealing with, and it's access to counselors who are expertise in those various areas. They obviously route you to the right person to talk to, and they just guide you through navigating some of those challenges. And so we found, for example, last year I think about 6,000 employees accessed those services, and got support when they needed that support.
Yeah, that is quite incredible because of the size of the operation to be able to make a service like that available. And yeah, I hear you speak, and you can understand how the company has had so many challenges, but at the same time there's the general public opinion, but that's kind of like you still have to try your hardest to turn the situation around, and that can only be done with like a positive framework of a transparency and a clear vision of what is that we're trying to achieve. And those things they have to be there. It's fundamental that that's there, that in order to turn the page around. So it is very, I would say, again, I look at it from a nature point of view, and I can see how what an important role HR has at this stage to be able to help and support everybody in the organization so that everybody can be at their best doing their job, and really helping towards this mission of getting Eskom to a position where it's providing the service that needs to provide. And as you said, also looking at the future, right? Because it's not only, it's kind of almost not linear, the way to bring power to a house in South Africa. It's also, and a lot of through private initiatives, people like would look into other resources for power, like natural resources. And I guess it's also interesting to hear that Eskom is also looking into those things. What exactly is that Eskom is doing on renewable energies?
Yeah, so like I said, our strategy changed over the last 2 years, where we are looking at a just energy transition. And so that means changing our energy mix a little bit more and phasing out our coal power stations, which is a major part of our energy mix, and moving towards more of renewables, looking at more nuclear power, looking at a combination of gas as well. So really just phasing out the unclean energy, if we call it that, and moving towards cleaner energy. So we do have a 10 to 15-year plan, and we're working very closely with government to obviously deliver that plan. It also includes partnering with public-private partnerships as well. And so I mentioned earlier that we are restructuring our business. And one of the reasons we're doing that is so that we can introduce more private players into the energy market. So by splitting the company that manages our electricity grid and creating an independent company, which we call the National Transmission Company of South Africa. They'll actually be separating from Eskom in July of this year, or at least from the holdings company. And they will be able to then purchase power from private players. And in doing so, you create that healthy competition in the market. It gives customers like you more options to choose from. And it means that the cost of electricity, ideally over the long term, should start to decline because you're dealing with more efficiencies within the market. So it's a really interesting journey that we're going through. Is going to take us time. It's new for our country because Eskom had been a monopoly for so long. And so it's a lot of complexity that we're trying to navigate, but it's a really exciting time, I think, for Eskom, but also for the country and for customers as well. We're also seeing a change in customer behavior. So we have a concept called prosumerism, where we have consumers who are now producing electricity. So, they're also able to then sell back to the grid. So a lot of the legislation and regulations have changed within the energy market to allow you, if you want to generate a megawatt of electricity, to be able to then sell that back to the grid. So it's really exciting, I think.
Yeah, if anything, everything that has happened in the last years have had a massive push for innovation and to look at ways to, solve. And I think that gives a competitive advantage over other countries, right? That just have, traditional ways of doing things that work, and just, go with it. But, and not only in this sector, I see that in South Africa a lot, where the the fact that we are seeing, like real problems that we need to solve, we have newer technologies to work with, so that brings about innovation. So it is, commendable in that way to hear these things. And I can only think, again, going back to the HR work, how close you also HR needs to be to the consumer, right? Because at the end of the day, the experience that Eskom is providing also reflects on how you need to align communication internally, so that everybody is on that same boat in terms of what we're trying to achieve, what people are perceiving. As you're saying, you're doing like satisfaction scoring as well, and then how we bring it back to our people, so that we know how to deliver better, to say it in a way, and communicate. And again, also probably because it's a public company, the fact that communication, transparency in the communication, and continuous coming from leadership, as you said, in terms of what are we doing, a lot of accountability, I guess, with the, as you also mentioned, the story of, like, not necessarily that maybe being the case, that transparency, and you mentioned corruption as well. So I take that there's massive changes that the company is going through, but it is lovely to hear that it seems to be in the right direction.
Yeah, and you mentioned something. How close is HR to the consumer? And I think we are responsible for making sure that our Eskom employees are ambassadors for our company, because they're the face of the organization, right? And although we have one specific division that deals directly with customers, I think it's so important for us, as every Eskom employee, whether you're dealing with a customer or not, to understand some of the basics around customer service. And I mentioned earlier that I'm a customer, my mom's a customer, my friends are customers. And so if I don't know what's happening in the organization as an employee, if I don't know how to help my mom or my friends with some of their challenges, or at least direct them to the right channels, then I'm failing as an Eskom employee as well. So as HR, it's really important that we educate our employees around customer services, and customer satisfaction is one of our values as Eskom. And so we really try to reiterate that value across the organization. And distribution, which is our division that really focuses on customer services, are also working on rolling out training for our employees, within the divisions, to improve the way we engage with customers, even if you're not a direct customer facing employee. So creating those ambassadors, I think, is really important for any organization, because you want everyone to represent the company equally, but also with the right caliber of understanding. So I always try, when I'm at a braai or a family barbecue, I always try to make sure that the people I'm around understand not just the challenges, but also the good things about Eskom. We obviously stay here for a reason. I haven't left Eskom because I love working here, because I know I'm having a direct impact on the country, on our economy, on people in my life. And so I think it's just about understanding that importance and communicating it to other people.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I guess when you hire and also how you retain is this thing around, there's such a bigger purpose here that we're working towards, and also that almost like a personal need for dedication and just like public service, right? That you need to have, because in order to really make a difference, that's so core, that motivation is there. What if you were to, like, simplify, or just say in a few words, what the current mission of the company is? What exactly is at the moment?
So our one statement is powering growth sustainably. And so I think those three keywords are important. Powering, obviously, because we're in the electricity sector. Growth, because we're in our growth phase. Right now, we're trying to grow our organization, make sure every South African has access to electricity, and then obviously start moving within the continent, and making sure that as an organization we're growing from a technology point of view, that we're changing, that we're innovating. And then the last part of that statement is sustainably. And the reason that's also important is because we want to make sure that as we adapt, being a state-owned company, we have a developmental role. We need to make sure we are, people in our country have jobs, that we're not negatively impacting the communities where potentially our power stations may be closing down, or that we're not allowing people to lose their jobs. And so it's important, especially from an HR point of view, to reskill people. We've already started training people within the communities, so that as these power stations start ramping down, that communities are also skilled, and that they can adapt to the changes. So our role is so much bigger than just our employees. We also have a role from a community development point of view. And so I think that that's our statement, really: powering growth sustainably.
Mm. Yeah, because I'm also picturing now, as you mentioned, the community and the impact that it has. Also, this thing around with a lot of people getting solar, there's also the company, the consumer ratio probably went down as well, and that means that that obviously has an impact on the revenue of the company, and that can only add a degree of difficulty to all the changes that are happening. So I can understand that it's a little bit of a difficult cycle to break. But as you said, it looks like the company is very much trying to look inwards, reinvent itself, newer technologies, and also with a great mission to, as you mentioned, is South Africa, but also looking at Africa as well. Is that how, looking in the context of Africa, where, like, what type of innovations or opportunities are seen in the rest of Africa when it comes to, is it powering through renewable energy, or what is that? How is it look like in Africa?
Yeah, so I think firstly, from an Eskom point of view, our focus right now is making sure South Africans have electricity. And once we make sure we're stable in that perspective, then our move is to move into the continent. Currently, we actually supply 40% of the continent's electricity. So if you put that into perspective, it's quite a huge number. And so I think just in general, opportunities not just for Eskom, but for private players and things like that. There's so much of opportunity within the renewable space, within hydroelectricity. So if I take East Africa, for example, there's a significant amount of projects that are happening within that space, and a lot of the investment is coming from Europe, East Asia, China, etc. And so there's opportunities for us to localize and build skills within the continent. And I think that's where HR needs to play a huge role, is how do we make sure we are building and localizing those skills so that we're not having to get foreign investment all the time, or have foreign developers coming in and doing the work for us. In South Africa, for example, solar panels, sometimes we import, in most cases we import those technologies, and so we really should be building those skills locally. And right now we're actually doing something like that within Eskom. We have a training facility that we have recently launched and are establishing at our Komati power station, which is one of our older power stations that will eventually close down. And we launched this training facility in partnership with Saratech, which is South African Renewables organization. And the idea is to train people on how do we operate, how do we build, how do we maintain renewables equipment. We are rolling out what we call microgrids, which are basically, if you imagine a shipping container that has a battery inside and a solar panel on top. And it's a module that you can move to any place. It's portable, basically. And you can then supply electricity to about 10 to 12 homes in a place where potentially they might not have access to the grid. And so we started rolling out projects like that, and we're actually starting to manufacture those microgrids from Eskom. So that's a new product, it's a new service, and it's still dealing with the issue of giving people access to electricity. And that's something that can be done across the continent.
No, that sounds amazing. Where do you find this information from, all these developments from Eskom? Is it on the Eskom website to say we're launching this product, this is, or recruiting for these skills as well? Is that on the website? Where do you find this information?
Yeah, absolutely. On our website, so that's eskom.co.za, but also our social media pages. So I mentioned earlier the communication about the positive stories. So if you follow us on Facebook or Instagram, you'll see posts about some of the projects that we're rolling out. We issue media statements as well. So if you just watch the news, sometimes you'll also see some of these projects. Our Minister of Electricity has also been quite vocal. Our Minister of DPE, they support us when we roll some of these projects out. And so if you follow them on Facebook, Twitter as well, you should see some of these communicated. So I think there's definitely different options, and LinkedIn as well, our LinkedIn page for Eskom as well. So definitely, I would encourage all customers, and even if you're not a direct customer of Eskom, to follow these pages, because it's important to keep up with what's happening in our country, especially if it's directly impacting you from a power point of view.
Yes, I actually saw you reposted something, a public announcement that was made recently on the 26th of April. I didn't go into look into what was it about, but I guess that's one of those in terms of like giving
Exactly.
updates. Yeah. And I want to touch base with this thing around the 4,000 employees that you have, permanent employees. How do you communicate internally? What channels do you use to make sure that it reaches everybody? Because a lot of these employees are people that are on the ground, on the different remote locations. So how do you keep everybody informed and feeling part of, of the same, just everybody on the same level of information, to say it in a way?
Yeah, it's definitely complex, and you've hit the nail on the head. We have such a diverse workforce of people who are in the office, but also field technicians and field workers. And so we have to have a combination of communication channels. So one of the things I guess every organization does is written communication. We have the emails and things like that. But what we've also started doing is introducing new technologies from a communication point of view. So we utilize tools such as Yammer, which is kind of like an internal Facebook page, and we post some of our communication on that channel. And most people have access to a phone, so if you don't have access to a computer, at least you have access to those channels on your phone. We also just leverage old technologies like SMS. Sometimes we SMS our employees, we SMS our customers to keep them informed, to encourage them to continue to be efficient and save electricity. And so there's a very diverse set of communication channels that we use. And then I think beyond the written communication is more the leadership engagement. So we have something called visible felt leadership that we try to drive within the organization. And we've tested out this no meeting Thursday, where on Thursdays we encourage leaders to sit with their teams, to be on sites, to visit employees that you don't see on a regular basis. Our group executive who joined in March has been doing a roadshow across the country. He's actually at one of our power stations today with some of the other executives, so that people feel connected to the business and don't feel like, we have people sitting at the head office that you don't see and you're far removed from. So it's definitely a combination of engagement and actually listening to our people and speaking to them one-on-one, but also a lot of written communication as well.
Yeah, I guess that, as you said, that kind of strategy of multi-channels to be able to reach it, like to the convenience of anybody, how they prefer to consume the information that you are there giving it to them.
Absolutely.
And
And
that's
and one of the things COVID taught us was that, leverage technology. So when we're not able to speak to people face to face, we utilize Teams, and that's the tool we have. And we have live events. I think we get up to 5,000 employees attending some of those events when we do them online. So we're able to then reach a larger audience sometimes when we have to engage on an ad hoc basis. So that's also one of the tools that has helped us a lot from a communication point of view.
And then for the HR department, when it comes to rolling out policies, but also maybe kind of on the practice of things. If you are to run performance management, if you need to do a legal proceeding, and this is like in remote areas, how do you guys work that out? Do you travel to the places to get things done? Do you have remote offices?
Yeah, we have about 1.1 million square meters of properties across the country. So we are really spread in remote. Remember, when you're providing electricity, you're providing it to people in remote areas as well. So we need to have employees who are close to those areas who can support when you have a power outage or things like that. So we have offices in areas you probably wouldn't have even heard of. And so we definitely have people who can travel to those sites when needed. And we try to make the best of the situation through that way. But I think just in general, we do travel a lot between sites. So if there's something happening in Cape Town, for example, we have our Coburg power station, we have our Brackenfell centers, we have Belleville offices. So there's really communities everywhere from an Eskom point of view that help us deliver some of the services that we need to.
Yeah, I hear you. So then all the work that gets kind of concentrated in HQ is very much setting up procedures so then that they can be followed when it comes to the office on the ground. Do you have HR representatives on the ground, or is it maybe like a general manager that you work with so that things happen?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of both. We do have HR, practitioners across the country as well at the different business units. But where we can, we definitely also leverage technology. Not everyone's able to travel, and so where we need to do things virtually, we try to utilize that as well. But some things are better done in person, and when we need to travel, we do that as well. So I think Eskom has a travel management policy, and we just allow people to travel if they need to for work. At the end of the day, it's important for us to, be face to face with our employees and make sure that if there's support that's required, if there's a legal proceeding like you're saying, it's sometimes really important to do those things in person.
Yeah, I hear you. And when it comes to the service provided, is there kind of, we spoke about the mission, but is there also like that kind of positive light to say it in a way of like when is it not going, load shedding is not going to be a thing anymore?
Yeah, well, I want to say now because we're 50 days of no load shedding, and I'm crossing my fingers and thumbs that we can go on for a long time. But so we do what we call a system status briefing every quarter, and we had one a few weeks ago where it's open to the public, so anyone can listen in. And our group chief executive basically shares what the status looks like for the next 3 months or the coming period. And obviously, we're going into winter, and winter is always difficult for us because you have people heating things, using more lighting because it gets dark earlier. And so it means that the demand on the system is quite high. And so we are expecting to see some load shedding, but not as bad as we saw last year. So we're expecting, up to stage 2 load shedding, but really nothing more than that, provided that we can continue at the pace we are continuing now. Last year, we spent a lot of time, effort, and resources on maintaining our power plants. And I think a lot of that is bearing fruit now, which is why we're seeing the improved performance that we're seeing. And I know the public has this perception that we're burning diesel and, we're doing a lot of these expensive things to maintain the grid. And that's really not the case. We're actually burning less diesel than we did last year. So it's not because we're burning that diesel, it's really because performance has improved and we have more units that are performing at a higher availability than we had last year. So I think the team has really worked hard, and I hope that people can really give credit to people who are coming into work really, early hours of the morning, leaving really late. Sometimes you have, power station managers spending their weekends at the power station because they have to be there to make sure the unit comes back. So people are really sacrificing a lot to make sure the country has power. And I think it's finally bearing fruit. But yeah, there will be load shedding. It won't be as bad as it was before. And I think over time we will get to a point where it's definitely a thing of the past.
Hmm. It's lovely to hear you speak because, as you said, I think that even though Eskom is doing a lot on the communication side, written comms, and putting a lot of information out there to the public, it's very different when you get to like hear you speaking about someone from Eskom speaking about how Eskom operates. Because then I think there's more intentionality that you hear, right? In terms of like, listen, we're working really hard here. There's a lot of sacrifices being made. And you also made a really good point that the things that you do today, you see the result in a year time. So it's a very long term vision that you guys are working with, and it's lovely to hear you speak about not only when we manage to get the situation controlled, but also these future plans that we have and how future focused you guys are in terms of the solutions that you're trying to find, and as well as this idea of like getting the right people in the right jobs, right? Newer generations coming on board, looking at that skills gap, right? How to skill up people, and with really cool initiatives, like in one of your oldest plans, building the skills program. So it looks like really positive for the future, and that's so encouraging to hear, because it is really one of those I guess those use cases that we could use for South Africa, in terms of like, again, innovation in South Africa is big, and it is because of these challenges that the country faces, and the country is resilient. You can see it. So with the right people on board, you can, and you spoke about the leadership as well, how important that is. And it's really giving people hope, I would say, in really like such important matters, because obviously it is something that, if you think about it, the degree of it, in every conversation every South African has had, in like it's I wouldn't say daily, but it's almost like weekly, it will be something that you speak about, right? So it has
Yeah,
touched us all. and
exactly.
so that's the magnitude of what's at hand. And it's, yeah, very reassuring to hear you speak, also because you represent HR, right? So at the core is the people from at Eskom, what you care for, and the fact that it does seem like the company turned the page around and is looking towards a better, brighter future. It is really wonderful. And again, if that is to happen the way you see it happening, what a beautiful story and win for South Africa. Massive use case to use as to how everybody can work together, right, for a better future.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that
And I think this is an example of where I say each ESCOM employee is an ambassador. So if I can change one person's mindset about, what's happening at ESCOM and what the future looks like. And, we have 40,000 employees, like I said, so that if each person influences one person and that person influences another, we've created this, coalition and this exponential change within the country. So that's really where we're trying to go to. And like I said, we stay here for a reason. Eskom is a huge organization that has direct impact on the country. And we as Eskom, we call ourselves guardians because we're really here to protect the grid and the system and power for our people. And so it's so important for us to make sure that customers are getting the service they deserve and the power that they need. And I think I'm very hopeful that we will get there.
that's amazing to hear. Well, thank you so much. That was such an enlightening conversation. It's very brave, and I don't know if you've done it before, but it's very brave, to be an ambassador and to put the word out there. And I think you definitely speak from the experience, from the knowledge, right, of what's going on, and the willingness to share that. Those are such key components, right, for everybody to work together and to stay hopeful. So yeah, thanks so much. Lovely also to hear from all the HR initiatives. You guys seem to be like really on top of what's happening and how to look at the employee experience at Eskom. So that's also really nice to hear that people are being taken care of in situations where you go like kind of um a mode where it's all about servicing customers, but not to forget that actually, your internal customers are, the most important to make it all work.
Mhm.
So what a massive
Yeah.
job for the HR team, right?
Absolutely. I think HR professionals have a really tough job in any organization. And so I think we're privileged that we get to impact people on a daily basis. So I think, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. Like I said, I'm new to the HR fraternity and I'm learning a lot myself. And I think just engaging with, people like you, we met at the IPM conference, and I think learning from different people has also been really powerful in introducing those types of innovations in the HR space within Eskom as well.
Yeah, big time. And I think, also that global inspiration as well that you get to do when you go to
Mhm.
conferences, when are part of HR, that also really helps to see how, just to know, where you are at, what is that you are implementing, what are opportunities and what's being done out there. And yeah, it's really, you managed to unpack quite a few of the things that you guys do at Eskom. And with the size of the company, it's quite amazing that you are able to roll out all those initiatives, and that things seem to be, in a much more calmer and focused state, and results are starting to happen. So I'm sure it's very reassuring for everybody. A little bit of a pat in the back, saying, like the job well done, and to continue on that journey, right?
Definitely, it's a long journey trying to change. I mean, we're trying to change culture, we're trying to change people's mindsets and behaviors. So it's definitely not going to happen, tomorrow. It's a long journey, but I think we're definitely seeing the turnaround.
Hmm. Lovely. Well, we can leave it on that note, on the really positive note. And maybe in the future, we will do another one where, it's like looking at reflections of how everything unfolded. But thank you so much for your
Definitely.
time. Lovely to hear from you, Valisha. And we're going to stay in touch.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.